I arrived at the hospital to see my daughter in intensive care, and suddenly a nurse grabbed me by the arm and hid me in a storage room. Shh! Trust me and watch. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. A minute later, what happened made my blood run cold. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. The phone shattered the darkness like a brick through glass. I fumbled for it on the nightstand, knocking over the water glass I kept there. The screen glowed harsh and white, unknown. My heart was already racing before I pressed the button, before I was even fully awake. "Mr. Perez?" A woman's voice, shaky. Wrong somehow. "This is Phoenix Memorial Hospital. Your daughter Mamie was brought in an hour ago. Critical condition. You need to come immediately." The words punched through my chest. I sat up, sheets tangling around my legs. "What happened? What kind of accident?" "Car accident. Serious injuries. Please come now." The line went dead. I stared at the phone. Something about that voice. It had a rhythm to it, like she was reading from a script. But terror drowns out logic. I threw off the covers and grabbed yesterday's clothes from the chair. My hands wouldn't cooperate with the buttons on my shirt. Critical condition. The phrase kept looping through my mind. Outside, Phoenix lay silent under a sky just beginning to lighten at the edges. The streetlights cast everything in sodium orange. I started the car and pulled onto the empty road. My jaw clenched so tight my teeth ached. 20 minutes to the hospital. Maybe less if I pushed it. The steering wheel felt slick under my palms. I ran a yellow light at Thomas Road, didn't even hesitate. This wasn't grief yet. This was something colder, sharper. 30 years on the federal bench had trained me to compartmentalize, to think clearly under pressure, but this was my daughter. When had I last seen her? 3 days ago. She'd come downstairs while I was making coffee, didn't quite meet my eyes when she asked if I could loan them money for groceries. $200. Luther hadn't even bothered to come down. I'd written the check and watched her fold it into her pocket without a thank you. Before that, 18 months ago, $15,000 for a business opportunity that never materialized. Last year, $8,000 for Luther's medical treatment that left no visible results. 6 months back, $22,000 for an investment they needed immediately. Each time, gratitude evaporated within days. Each time, the contempt returned like weather. I forced my attention back to the road. Central Avenue stretched ahead, deserted. The buildings looked accusatory in their stillness, as if they'd been waiting to witness this moment. Phoenix Memorial appeared on my right, all concrete and glass and emergency lights. I parked crooked across 2 spaces and ran for the entrance. The automatic doors seemed to move too slowly. Inside, fluorescent lights hit me like a slap. Harsh, clinical, revealing. A woman in scrubs sat behind the registration desk, typing something into her computer. I reached the counter, breathing hard. My voice came out steady despite everything. "My daughter, Mamie Perez, she was brought in. Car accident, critical condition. ICU." The nurse looked up, fingers still on the keyboard. Her expression was professional, patient. "Let me verify. What time was she admitted, sir?" "An hour ago, maybe 90 minutes. I got the call around 6:30. She clicked through screens, her eyes scanning. Then she frowned, clicked again. Her frown deepened. "Sir, I'm not showing any Mamie Perez in our system tonight. No ICU admissions in the past 3 hours." The words took a moment to register. I leaned forward, gripping the edge of the counter. "Check emergency, check trauma. Someone called me from this hospital." "Of course, sir. Let me contact the ER directly." She picked up the phone. I watched her dial, watched her speak in low tones to whoever answered. She made 3 calls. Each time her confusion grew more visible. Each time she glanced at me with something like concern. Standing there, watching her work through the protocols, I felt the panic begin to drain away. It left something colder in its wake. That phone call, I had dismissed it in the moment, but now the details came back. The woman's voice had been nervous, yes, but underneath that nervousness was something rehearsed, mechanical. She'd delivered her lines and hung up before I could ask questions. "Sir?" The nurse set down the phone. "I've checked with ER, trauma, and ICU. We've had no patients by that name tonight. No car accidents matching that description either." The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Somewhere down a corridor, a monitor beeped in steady rhythm. I looked at this woman, young, competent, genuinely trying to help, and knew she was telling the truth. "Thank you," I heard myself say. "I appreciate you checking." She offered to verify again, to call other hospitals in the area. I told her that wouldn't be necessary. My voice stayed calm, controlled, but inside, pieces were shifting, clicking into place like evidence in a courtroom. Someone had lied to get me here. Someone who knew exactly which words would send me running into the night without thinking. Someone who knew I'd come for Mamie, no matter what history lay between us. I turned toward the exit, my mind already working through possibilities. But something kept me there in the lobby, some instinct I'd learned to trust over decades of weighing testimony and reading faces. Something was very wrong here, but not in the way I'd feared. That's when I felt a hand on my forearm. The hand gripped my arm firmly, urgently. I turned to find a woman in scrubs beside me, older than the registration nurse, maybe mid-40s, with tired eyes that held something fierce and determined. Her name tag read, Verna Turner. "Shh!" Her whisper was barely audible. "Trust me and watch." "What are you—" But she was already pulling me away from the desk, moving quickly down a side corridor. Her fingers were strong, insistent. I could have resisted. Should have, maybe. But something in her urgency made me follow. She stopped at a small supply closet, pulled the door open, and guided me inside. The space was narrow, shelves lined with linens and cleaning supplies. She positioned me carefully by the door, left it open just a crack, then put a finger to her lips. "Don't make a sound," she whispered, her mouth close to my ear. "Your daughter, she's not injured." The words didn't make sense. I started to speak, but she gripped my shoulder, shook her head sharply. Then she pointed through the gap in the door. "Just watch." The corridor stretched out before us, empty and white under the overhead lights. I could hear my own breathing, feel Verna standing tense beside me. Then footsteps echoed from somewhere to the right. Mamie walked into view, not limping, not bandaged, not injured in any visible way. She moved with her usual stride, quick, purposeful, the walk of someone perfectly healthy. A man in a white coat walked beside her, middle-aged, uncomfortable in his posture. A doctor, presumably. They stopped about 15 feet from our hiding place. I couldn't breathe. Verna's hand remained on my shoulder, steadying. "You want me to tell him?" The doctor's voice was low, reluctant. "Spinal injuries, $85,000 for surgery." Mamie's response came calm, calculated, no trace of distress. "The insurance won't cover it. He'll have to pay out of pocket. I'll give you $3,000 for your help." My hands curled into fists. The edge of a shelf pressed into my back, but I didn't move, didn't make a sound. 30 years of maintaining composure in court served me now. "This is highly irregular." Another voice cut in, one I recognized immediately. Luther appeared from a doorway, his grin visible even from this distance. That smug, self-satisfied expression I'd seen at my breakfast table for the past 2 years. The old man will give everything he has to save his little girl. He actually laughed. "Trust us. He's good for it." The doctor shifted uncomfortably, but nodded. They spoke for another minute, details about when I'd received the call explaining the diagnosis, how urgent they'd make it sound, where I should wire the money. Mamie's voice never wavered. She could have been discussing grocery lists. Then they walked away, disappearing around the corner toward the main lobby. Their footsteps faded. Silence settled over the corridor like dust. Verna released my shoulder and stepped back. I turned to look at her. Really look at her. A woman coming off a long shift, exhaustion etched around her eyes, but standing straight with the kind of integrity that can't be faked. "I overheard them an hour ago," she said quietly. "They were in an empty patient room, planning this. I tried to find you before you got here, but—" She shook her head. "I'm sorry you had to see it this way." I discovered my voice still worked. It came out level, cold. "Don't apologize. You did me a service." We stepped out of the closet. The corridor was empty now, just harsh light and antiseptic smell and the distant beeping of monitors. I extended my hand. She shook it. "Would you be willing to testify about what you heard?" I asked. "If it comes to that." She met my eyes. "Yes," without hesitation. I thanked her. Asked for her contact information. She wrote it on a piece of paper from her pocket. Neat handwriting, decisive strokes. Then I walked toward the exit, measuring each step, not rushing, not fleeing, just moving with purpose. The parking lot was lighter now, dawn breaking pink and gold over the mountains east of the city. I found my car where I'd left it, crooked across the painted lines. Got in, locked the doors. Then I allowed myself one moment. My hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, breath coming hard and fast. The rage felt physical, a living thing trying to claw its way out of my chest. I let it rise, let it peak, then forced it back down, pushed it into a box and closed the lid. Emotion was useless. Emotion made you sloppy. I sat there as the sun continued its climb, painting the hood of my car in shades of copper. My daughter, my only child, had just tried to extort $85,000 from me, using a fake medical emergency. Luther, that parasite who'd moved into my house like he owned it, was not just complicit, but gleeful about it. They thought I was weak, old, easy prey. They had miscalculated. 30 years as a federal judge had taught me many things. How to read people, how to build an airtight case, how to execute judgment with precision. And most importantly, the best revenge isn't hot and immediate. It's cold, methodical, and devastating. I started the car. The engine turned over smooth and quiet. I had work to do, plans to make. But first, I needed to go home. They'd be expecting me to return panicked, desperate, ready to hear about Mamie's injuries and open my checkbook. Let them wait. Let them think their trap had worked. I pulled out of the parking lot and headed east, driving carefully now, observing every speed limit. The morning traffic was beginning to build. Phoenix was waking up around me, oblivious. People heading to jobs, to coffee shops, to ordinary Saturday errands. My Saturday was going to be anything but ordinary. I had a daughter to ruin. The next day, I drove back to Phoenix Memorial. Morning traffic moved sluggishly along Central Avenue. I used the time at red lights to practice in the rearview mirror. Worried father, confused elder, desperate to help. The expressions felt foreign on my face. None of it was real. All of it was necessary. I parked in the same lot where panic had driven me 30 hours earlier. This time, my hands were steady on the wheel. I'd spent the previous day in my study, thinking, planning, letting the shock crystallize into something useful. Now came the performance. Dr. Graham waited in a consultation room near the ICU. Middle-aged, graying at the temples, the kind of bland professional face you forget 5 minutes after meeting. He gestured to a chair, and I sat, leaning forward like a man searching for hope. He clipped films onto a light board, MRI scans, supposedly of Mamie's spine. I studied them carefully. 30 years reviewing medical malpractice cases had taught me what real spinal trauma looks like. These were generic stock images, the kind medical students practice reading. The resolution was wrong. The anatomical markers didn't match. Mr. Perez, Graham's tone carried practiced gravity. Your daughter has severe spinal compression at C5-C6. Without immediate surgical intervention, she risks permanent paralysis. I blinked slowly, manufactured confusion crossing my features. But the accident. How did this happen? The impact caused vertebral displacement. He said it smoothly, confidently, too confidently. We need to operate within 72 hours. The cost is $85,000. Insurance classifications exclude this as elective stabilization. I let my hands tremble slightly as I gripped the armrests. 85. That's everything I have saved. Graham's expression remained neutral, but I caught it. The briefest flicker of satisfaction in his eyes. He was calculating his cut. He led me down the corridor to Mamie's room. She lay propped against pillows, wearing a neck brace positioned completely wrong for any actual cervical injury. Her face was arranged in brave suffering, but I saw what she couldn't hide. The gleam of anticipation, the slight curve of her lips when she thought I wasn't watching. Dad? Her voice came out weak, strained. Don't worry about the money. I'll be fine. I moved to her bedside, reached for her hand. She flinched, just slightly involuntarily, before accepting it. The brace held her head at an angle meant to look vulnerable. The pillow arrangement was for comfort, not medical necessity. Everything was theater. Don't talk like that, I said, letting my voice crack. You're my daughter. Of course I'll find the money. Her eyes glistened. Real tears this time, I realized. Not from fear or pain, from excitement. I don't want you to sacrifice everything for me. The words tasted like ash in my mouth. You're all I have left. The door opened and Luther walked in, his expression arranged in concern. He placed a hand on my shoulder, heavy, possessive. I fought the urge to shove it off. "Jesse, we can figure this out." His tone was sympathetic, but his eyes were calculating the payout. "You have equity in the house, right? A loan against that could cover—" "A loan?" I interrupted, uncertainty flooding my voice. "At my age, the payments—" "Temporary measure." Luther's grip tightened slightly. "Once Mamie recovers, she'll be working again. We'll help you pay it back." The lie hung in the air between us, obvious to me, invisible to him. "I'll talk to the bank," I said quietly. Dr. Graham stepped forward with paperwork, acknowledgement of consultation, consent forms for procedures not yet scheduled. My hands shook as I signed. The shaking was manufactured but looked real enough. I dropped my pen once, apologized, fumbled with my reading glasses. Luther and Mamie exchanged a glance. The old man is falling apart. At the door, I turned back. 2 days. I'll have the money in 2 days. Graham nodded solemnly. "Time is critical, Mr. Perez." "I understand." I met Mamie's eyes. "I won't let my daughter down." Walking down the corridor, I passed the nurse's station. Verna Turner stood there reviewing a chart. Our eyes met briefly. She gave me an almost imperceptible nod. That silent communication steadied something inside me. I had an ally, a witness, someone who'd seen through their performance before I had. I continued toward the exit, moving slowly like a man carrying unbearable weight. Behind me, voices drifted from Mamie's room. They thought I was out of earshot. Luther's quiet laugh carried down the hall. "Told you it would work. He's completely broken." Mamie's response was barely audible. "Keep your voice down. We need to wait until the money clears." "Relax. The old man won't suspect anything until it's too late." In my car, I sat without starting the engine. Let the performance drain away. My reflection in the rearview mirror showed my real face, cold, analytical, determined. Then I pulled out my phone and made the first call. "Roberts and Associates," the receptionist answered. "I need an appointment with Wallace Roberts, estate planning, today if possible." "Let me check his schedule, sir." I waited, watching the hospital entrance in my side mirror, planning my next moves. They wanted my money, fine. But first, I needed to protect everything they thought they'd inherit. The receptionist returned. "Mr. Roberts has an opening at 4 this afternoon." "I'll take it." I started the car and pulled out of the parking lot. 2 days, I'd promised. That gave me 48 hours to build my defenses. They had no idea what was coming. The law office of Roberts and Associates occupied the second floor of a brick building in downtown Phoenix. I arrived at 4 sharp, was shown into Wallace Roberts' office within minutes. He was younger than I'd expected. Maybe 45, professional suit, no wedding ring. Good. Fewer complications. "Mr. Perez?" He shook my hand, gestured to a leather chair. "You mentioned estate planning on the phone. What can I help you with?" I'd found him through the State Bar Association directory. No prior relationship meant no questions about sudden changes. "I need to revise my will, immediately." Roberts didn't blink. Estate lawyers rarely ask why. "Of course. Do you have your current will available?" I pulled the document from my briefcase. He reviewed it quickly, efficiently. His expression remained neutral, but I saw him noting the figures. House valued at $580,000, savings at $240,000, various investments, everything currently designated to my daughter Mamie. "And what changes are you looking to make?" "The house goes to the Judicial Veterans Assistance Fund. It's a registered charity supporting retired court personnel." I had verified the organization's legitimacy that morning. "My daughter receives $50,000, nothing else." Robert's pen paused fractionally before continuing to write. To his credit, he didn't ask, just nodded. "I'll draft the revision. We can have it witnessed and filed with the county recorder today if you'd like." "I would." He worked for 90 minutes while I waited, reviewing the language, checking the charitable designation codes. When he presented the final document, every clause was precise, legally airtight. I read it twice before signing. 2 paralegals witnessed. Roberts promised same-day filing. "The original will remain in effect until this one is properly recorded," he explained. "That should happen by close of business." I wrote him a check for $1,800, less than I'd expected. From the law office, I drove to my bank. Not the main branch where I'd banked for 30 years, That would raise questions. A smaller branch across town, where no one knew my face or my patterns. I'd like to open a new savings account, I told the manager, and transfer funds from my existing account at the main branch. She pulled up my information, her expression carefully professional when she saw the balance. How much would you like to transfer, Mr. Perez? $150,000. She processed the transaction without comment. The new account appeared in the system, invisible to anyone checking my primary account. That account now showed just over $90,000, enough to cover the fake surgery with a small cushion. If they checked my balance, and I suspected they would, they'd see available money, but not my full worth. You'll receive confirmation by mail within 5 business days, the manager said. I thanked her and left. One more stop. The private investigation agency occupied an office in a commercial complex near the airport. Nondescript, professional, licensed by the state. The investigator who met me was in her 50s, graying hair pulled back, eyes that had seen enough not to be surprised by anything. What kind of information are you looking for, Mr. Perez? Background on Luther Roberts, employment history, financial activities, anything that's public record. I kept my tone carefully neutral. He's my son-in-law. I'm considering a family business arrangement and need due diligence. A plausible lie. She didn't challenge it. I can provide a comprehensive report within a week. Standard rate is $2,500. I paid her retainer in cash. She gave me a receipt and her card. I'll call when the report is ready. Driving home, I felt the pieces clicking into place. Will revised and filed. Assets protected and hidden. Investigation underway. They thought they were hunting a helpless old man. They had no idea they'd walked into something else entirely. The next 5 days crawled past. I stayed home mostly, maintaining the appearance of anguish. Mamie called twice asking about the money. I told her I was working on it, that the bank needed documentation. My voice shook appropriately. She ate it up. On the 6th day, the investigator called. Your report is ready, Mr. Perez. Would you like to pick it up or should I mail it? I'll come by. The report was 40 pages, meticulously documented. I read it in my study that evening, each page confirming what I'd suspected and revealing horrors I hadn't imagined. Luther Roberts had no legitimate employment for the past 4 years. His income came sporadically from online sources, gambling sites mostly. Casino records showed losses totaling $45,000 over 3 years. The timeline matched perfectly with the money I'd given them. Every business opportunity, every medical treatment, every investment had gone straight to blackjack tables and sports betting. There was more. Fraud charges in Nevada, dismissed on technicality, restraining order from a previous girlfriend, pattern of financial manipulation going back a decade, $45,000. Money I'd given them, believing it would help Mamie build something, save something, improve something. All of it gone. Gambled away while Luther smirked and Mamie asked for more. And now they wanted $85,000 more. I placed the report in my safe, next to my new will and the bank statements. Everything was in order, the house protected, most of my savings hidden, evidence documented, Verna Turner ready to testify. The investigators' findings preserved. They thought they were playing me. They had no idea the game had changed. Tomorrow, I'd return to that hospital with their money, and the countdown to their ruin would begin. 1 week later, I stood in my bedroom holding the cashier's check. $85,000. The paper felt heavier than it should, dense with meaning. I photographed it from 3 angles, evidence of payment, proof of fraud, then slipped it into my jacket pocket. The mirror showed exactly what I wanted them to see. Rumpled shirt, unshaven face, exhaustion carved into the lines around my eyes. I'd practiced this appearance, calculated every detail. The performance had to be flawless. Phoenix Memorial looked the same as it had that first panicked morning, but I walked through those doors differently now. Measured steps, shoulders slightly hunched, a man bearing an impossible weight. Dr. Graham waited in Mamie's room. She still wore that ridiculous neck brace, positioned wrong for any actual injury. Her eyes tracked me as I entered, and I saw it. The flash of anticipation she couldn't quite suppress. Here. I let my voice come out weary, defeated. Everything I could manage. The bank processed it yesterday. Graham took the check, examined it with rehearsed solemnity. A nurse stood in the doorway. Another witness to this transaction. Another piece of evidence clicking into place. Mr. Perez, you're giving your daughter a second chance at life. The irony burned my tongue. She's all I have. Mamie reached for my hand. Her fingers felt cold, performative. Dad, I don't know how to thank you. Just get better. That's all I need. Luther stood by the window, unable to fully hide his satisfaction. I watched him calculate, mentally spending money he thought he'd stolen successfully, the wine he'd drink, the tables where he'd lose it all. I moved to Mamie's bedside, let myself embrace her. She stiffened in my arms, uncomfortable with genuine physical affection, even when faking gratitude. Over her shoulder, I saw Luther's expression, already treating this house as his, already planning how to spend what he thought would soon be theirs. I met with my attorney last week, I said, as if the thought just occurred to me. Updated my will. I wanted to make sure you're protected, Mamie. The house, the savings, it's all yours when I'm gone. Her response came too quickly. Dad, don't talk like that. You'll be around for years. But her eyes gleamed. Luther stepped forward, smooth as oil. Still, it's smart to have things in order. Shows you care about family. Family? The word tasted like poison. Family is everything. Graham assured me the surgery would happen in 3 days. He'd call with updates. I nodded, playing the exhausted father, and left. Walking to my car, I knew that check would be deposited immediately. When the fraud investigation eventually caught up, the evidence trail would be complete. 2 days later, Graham called with wonderful news. The swelling had reduced dramatically. Surgery wouldn't be necessary after all. Thank goodness, I said, layering relief into my voice. So, the $85,000, the hospital will process the refund through insurance adjustments. He delivered the lies smoothly. Complex procedure, but you'll see most of it back eventually. Another lie to document, another nail in their collective coffin. I see, as long as Mamie is healthy. That evening, they returned to my house. Mamie moved without any hint of injury, the neck brace forgotten in the hospital room. They prepared dinner, a rare occurrence, calculated generosity. The pot roast filled the kitchen with smells from better times, times when family meant something other than predators circling prey. Dad, sit down, Mamie said, overly cheerful. We're making your favorite. You didn't have to go to this trouble. Luther poured wine without asking, expensive bottles from my cabinet. After everything you did for us, it's the least we can do. I watched them move through my kitchen like they owned it. Mamie rearranged the furniture slightly, small territorial claims. Luther opened drawers, checking contents, taking inventory, already planning the estate sale. I'm just glad you're safe, Mamie. She hugged me, whispered thanks for saving her life. The lie wrapped around us both, suffocating. I returned the embrace, playing my role, counting the hours until they'd reveal their true intentions. Late that night, I lay motionless in my bedroom. The wall I shared with the guest room was thin, deliberately so when I'd chosen which room they'd occupy. My phone rested on the nightstand, recording application running silently. Their voices came through clearly. They weren't even trying to whisper. 85 grand, just like that. Luther's excitement carried through the drywall. When the old man dies, we get everything. House is worth, what, 580? Plus whatever's in savings. Could be years, though. Mamie's voice calculating. He's healthy for his age. So we speed things up. Luther's tone shifted, darker now. That senior home, Sunny Vista or whatever. Get him committed, declared incompetent. Then we have power of attorney, control everything. Silence. Then Mamie, hesitant but agreeing. Or, there are other ways. Make it look natural. Old people fall downstairs all the time. Luther laughed, actually laughed. Now you're thinking, either way by summer, this place is ours. I lay in the darkness, phone recording every word, and felt something settle inside me. They'd crossed a line I hadn't expected them to cross. This wasn't just theft anymore. This was planning harm, planning my death or imprisonment. My only child and the parasite she'd welcomed into our lives, discussing my murder like a grocery list. The recording continued. I let it run until their voices faded to silence, until I heard Luther's snoring through the wall. Then I saved the file, encrypted it, backed it up to 3 locations. Evidence, documentation, proof. They thought they'd won. They had no idea the game had changed completely. Over the following weeks, the pressure intensified. I found the first senior living facility brochure on the kitchen counter 3 days after their late-night conversation. Sunny Vista Retirement Community. Glossy photos of smiling elderly residents, spacious rooms, comprehensive care for your loved ones. Subtle, calculated. More appeared throughout the week. On the coffee table, beside my reading chair. Inside the newspaper I read each morning. Each brochure highlighted different features: memory care units, assisted living, full medical supervision. The message was clear. Mamie raised it at breakfast one Tuesday morning, her voice carefully concerned. "Dad, I've been thinking, this house is getting too much for you to manage. Yard work, repairs, all those stairs." I looked up from my coffee, playing confused. "I've managed fine for 30 years. But you're not getting younger?" Luther joined in, his tone patronizing. "What if something happened? You're here alone most days." "You're both here. I'm not alone." Luther leaned forward, elbows on my table, invading my space. "We can't watch you every minute. What if you fell, forgot to turn off the stove?" The implied threat hung in the air. I let my hands tremble slightly around my coffee cup. "I haven't been feeling well lately. Can we talk about this another time?" Their eyes met across the table. Satisfaction passed between them. The old man is cracking. "Of course, Dad." Mamie reached over, patted my hand. "We just want what's best for you." That afternoon, while they were out, Luther at wherever he pretended to work, Mamie running errands, I met the private investigator at a coffee shop downtown, different location, away from their surveillance. She slid a folder across the table, thicker than the first report. "Your son-in-law is in serious trouble," she said quietly. $18,000 to a bookmaker named Rodrigo Sanchez. Non-regulated gambling debts. Deadline is end of May. I flipped through the documentation. Text messages, betting records, increasingly threatening communications. How serious? Text messages mention consequences. "These people don't go through courts." She paused. "And there's more. Your daughter tried to get power of attorney over your bank accounts 2 weeks ago." My coffee went cold in my hands. The bank caught it. "They called you for verification. When you denied it, they flagged the account. I have copies of the forged documents." She produced them, my signature, perfectly duplicated. Forms that would have given Mamie complete control of my finances. She'd signed as witness. Luther had notarized it, using credentials he didn't have. "They're escalating," the investigator said. "Whatever you're planning, do it soon." I paid her another $500, took the folder, and drove home. In my study, I added these documents to my growing collection. The evidence filled 2 accordion files now: hospital fraud, gambling debts, forged power of attorney, recorded threats. Each piece carefully labeled, dated, cross-referenced. But I wasn't ready to act yet. I needed them to commit fully, to eliminate any possibility of retreat. So, I performed decline. At breakfast, I'd ask what day it was. "Mamie, what day is today?" "Tuesday, Dad, April 8th. "Tuesday?" I thought. I'd trail off, confusion clouding my features. Never mind. The glances they exchanged were electric with satisfaction. Luther could barely hide it. "You seem more forgetful lately, Jesse. Maybe that checkup is a good idea." The checkup. Mamie had scheduled it without my consent. Appointment at the Senior Assessment Center for Thursday at 10. A diagnostic evaluation, she'd said. First step toward determining competency. I refused gently, playing weak rather than defiant. "I'll think about it." Her frustration showed through her concern. "Dad, you need to take your health seriously." "I will, I promise." I had no intention of going. That evaluation would be real, performed by actual medical professionals. My act wouldn't survive professional scrutiny. Luther grew more aggressive as April progressed. Each manufactured moment of forgetfulness, leaving my wallet somewhere visible, then searching for it, asking if I'd eaten lunch when they knew I had, was met with increasing contempt. "This is getting ridiculous." He barely controlled his anger. "You can't even remember where you put your wallet." "I'm sorry." I kept my voice apologetic, uncertain. "It was just, I thought I left it." "You're becoming a liability." Luther stood over me, using his height to intimidate. "What happens when you forget something important? Leave the door unlocked, wander off?" Mamie played gentler, enabling his aggression. Luther, don't be harsh. But Dad, he has a point. Maybe supervised living would be better. Better for them. A facility where I'd be isolated, medicated, stripped of autonomy. Where accidents could happen without witnesses. Where deaths were expected, unremarkable. I sat at my desk late one night, organizing the evidence files on my computer, folder within folder, each labeled clearly: hospital fraud, gambling debts, forgery, threats, financial records. Everything backed up, encrypted, stored safely. Luther's bookmaker deadline was 6 weeks away. They were running out of time, and desperation made people reckless. I'd seen it 1,000 times in court. Criminals who'd been careful suddenly making fatal mistakes because pressure forced their hand. I just needed to maintain the performance a little longer. Let them think they were winning. Let them commit to actions they couldn't undo. The trap wasn't set yet, but it was close. Very close. Mid-April arrived with clear Arizona skies and the weight of decisions made. I drove to Wallace Roberts' office carrying a leather folder that contained months of documentation. Every piece of evidence organized like a case brief. Witness statements, financial records, recordings transcribed to text. 30 years on the bench had taught me preparation, wins trials, not passion. Wallace met me in his conference room, coffee already poured. I laid out the documentation methodically. He reviewed each piece, making notes, occasionally glancing up with questions. Medical fraud, conspiracy, false diagnosis for financial gain. He tapped the PI report. And you have a witness willing to testify under oath? Verna Turner. She'll be here within the hour. He read her written statement, then looked at me with something approaching respect. With this evidence, we can file both civil and criminal complaints. The bank should freeze any transactions immediately. Do it, all of it. Wallace set down his pen. This will create significant consequences for your daughter and son-in-law. I met his eyes without wavering. They created those consequences themselves. Verna arrived 40 minutes later. She looked nervous but walked in with her shoulders straight. Determination overriding fear. I stood to greet her, shook her hand. Thank you for coming. It's the right thing to do, she said simply. Wallace guided her through the deposition with practiced efficiency. Her voice remained steady as she described that early morning in February. 3 people in an empty patient room, planning a scheme, discussing an $85,000 target. When he asked if she was certain about what she'd heard, she didn't hesitate. Completely certain. Mamie offered Dr. Graham $3,000 to cooperate. I recorded the time in my notes, 6:45 a.m. She signed the notarized affidavit without her hand wavering. I watched her signature form on the page and felt something shift. The evidence was no longer just documentation. It was sworn testimony that could survive cross-examination. From Wallace's office, I called my bank's fraud department on speakerphone. Mr. Perez, can you explain the nature of the fraud claim? I outlined the scheme concisely. Fake medical emergency, forged diagnosis, unnecessary surgery, $85,000 extracted through deception. Wallace nodded as I spoke, confirming the legal framework. We'll freeze the transaction immediately pending investigation, the fraud manager confirmed. I ended the call and met Wallace's eyes. The first domino had fallen. They'll know within hours, Wallace said. The hospital will contact them about the hold. Good. Let them panic. I drove home through afternoon traffic, the satisfaction cold and precise. No elation. Just the mechanical click of pieces falling into their designated places. At home, I settled in my study with case files from my judicial career, research for an article I'd been meaning to write, keeping up appearances. But I left my door ajar, listening. Mamie's phone rang around 4. Her voice carried through the house, shrill with disbelief. What do you mean frozen? The bank can't just... Wait, he filed what? Luther's deeper voice responded, angry and controlled. That old man is playing games. We need to shut this down now. Their footsteps approached my study. They didn't knock. Dad? Mamie's voice shook. What have you done? The hospital called? They're investigating? There's nothing to investigate. I looked up from my papers, expression neutral. If there's nothing to investigate, you have nothing to worry about. Luther moved closer, his height meant to intimidate. You filed complaints against your own daughter? What kind of father? The kind who recognizes fraud when he sees it. His face darkened. "You're making a serious mistake, old man." I set down my pen deliberately, met his eyes. "The court will determine the truth, not you." Mamie tried tears. "You never loved me. That's what this is really about. You want to punish me because—" I cut her off, my voice cold and factual. "I gave you everything. Money when you asked, a home when you needed it, trust when you didn't deserve it. This is cruel. You're being cruel." "No, I'm being just." Luther stepped forward again, his aggression barely contained. "You think you're so smart, filing your complaints, playing lawyer? You're going to regret this." "Are you threatening me? Because my attorney would be very interested in hearing threats." He backed down slightly, recalculating. "I'm not threatening anything. I'm stating facts. The fact is, you conspired to defraud me of $85,000. Everything else is noise." They left without another word. I heard them in their room, raised voices, accusations, panic setting in. Dr. Graham had called Mamie earlier, Wallace informed me later. The doctor was furious about the frozen payment, threatening to expose their whole arrangement unless he got paid. They were trapped between his demands and the investigation, exactly where I needed them. Late that night, my phone buzzed with a text from the private investigator. "New threats from bookmaker. Physical harm mentioned. Subject's deadline May 30th. He's desperate." I forwarded it to Wallace with a note. "Document this." Then I sat in my study, the house finally quiet, and added the text to my evidence files. Luther had 6 weeks to find $18,000. 6 weeks with no money, no prospects, and mounting legal troubles. Desperation made people reckless. I'd seen it 1,000 times. I was counting on it. 6 weeks passed with methodical precision. Wallace called on a Tuesday morning in late May, his voice carrying satisfaction he rarely allowed himself. "The court ruled in your favor. Dr. Graham's medical license is suspended pending criminal investigation. Phoenix Memorial returned the $85,000 plus $15,000 in penalties. The money should hit your account in 3 days. I thanked him, ended the call, and sat at my kitchen table drinking coffee. $100,000 returned, my property secure, the system functioning exactly as designed. Through the kitchen doorway, I could see Mamie and Luther in the living room. They'd been on their phones constantly since the ruling, voices low and urgent. Luther's bookmaker deadline was 8 days away. They had no money, no prospects, and criminal charges pending. I'd been watching them unravel for weeks, arguments that stretched past midnight, Luther disappearing for hours, returning empty-handed, Mamie crying in the guest room, realizing her father wouldn't rescue her this time. That afternoon, my phone rang. Linda Chen, the notary I'd asked to handle my property title back in March. "Mr. Perez, someone just tried to execute a property sale using your information. He claimed to be you, had documents showing transfer of your house." My grip tightened on the phone. "What did you tell him?" "That per your instructions from March, you must appear personally for any property transaction." I asked for identification. He became agitated and left quickly. "I'm calling the police now. The documents looked forged." "Do that. I'm coming to your office." I grabbed my car keys. In the living room, Luther's jacket hung over a chair. I checked the pockets, empty. But his laptop bag sat on the couch. Inside, printed property transfer forms, my forged signature, a fake ID with my photo replaced by Luther's. He'd been planning this for weeks, desperate enough to commit felony forgery. I left everything where it was and drove to Linda's office. She'd already called the police. A detective met me there, took my statement, photographed the legitimate documents I'd filed in March. "The suspect may return," the detective said. "We'll have officers watching." "He'll be back," I said. "He's out of options." I waited in my car across the street. 90 minutes later, Luther's sedan pulled into the lot. He walked into Linda's office with forced confidence, that same swagger he'd used in my kitchen when he thought I was weak. 2 patrol officers emerged from an unmarked car. They entered the building. Through the window, I watched Luther's expression change. Confusion, then understanding, then panic. He tried to leave. The officers blocked his path. The handcuffs looked almost gentle compared to the violence in his eyes. They led him out, read him his rights, placed him in the patrol car. Luther saw me then, sitting in my vehicle across the street. His face twisted with rage, but the car door closed on whatever words he wanted to scream. I drove home. Mamie was pacing the kitchen when I arrived, phone pressed to her ear. "They can't hold him without bail. What do you mean 25,000? We don't have that." She saw me and ended the call. Her face was pale, streaked with tears. "They arrested Luther for trying to sell your house." "I know. You knew? You—" Realization dawned. "You set this up. The notary, I protected my property in March. Luther chose to commit forgery today. He was desperate. You drove him to this." I set my keys on the counter, looked at her directly. "Luther tried to sell my house without my knowledge or consent. That's not desperation. That's theft. His bail is $25,000. Her voice broke. "That bookmaker, if Luther doesn't pay by Friday, they'll hurt him, maybe kill him. You have to help." "I don't have to do anything." "He's your son-in-law. I'm your daughter. How can you just—" "You tried to steal $85,000 from me using a fake medical emergency." I kept my voice level, factual. "You attempted to gain illegal access to my bank accounts. Luther just tried to sell my house with forged documents. You made your choices. Please, I'm begging you. You should have thought about consequences before you committed fraud. You're on your own." I walked to my study and closed the door. Her crying continued in the kitchen, but I felt nothing except the cold satisfaction of watching a plan execute perfectly. My phone buzzed with a text from Wallace. "Police called. Luther arrested for forgery and attempted fraud. Both felonies. Won't make bail. Trial in 6 weeks." I replied, "Document everything." The house grew quiet as evening settled. Mamie left. Where? I didn't know or care. Luther sat in jail. My money was being returned. My property was secure. The legal system I'd served for 30 years had functioned exactly as it should. Fraud was exposed. Criminals were caught. Evidence was properly documented and presented. Justice was correctly applied. I felt no triumph, no joy. Only the precise satisfaction of seeing consequences delivered with mathematical accuracy. They'd tried to play me for a fool. They'd underestimated what 3 decades on the federal bench taught a man about preparation, evidence, and patience. That mistake would cost them everything. 2 weeks later, notification arrived that Luther had posted bail. I checked the bail bond company's public records online. Mamie's name appeared as guarantor. A few inquiries through channels I still had access to revealed she'd borrowed the $25,000 from a predatory lender at 22% annual interest. The first payment alone would be nearly $500 monthly. They were drowning in debt they had no means to repay. Luther returned to the house on a Tuesday afternoon. I watched from my study window as he climbed out of Mamie's car. His shoulders were slumped, his movements careful, deliberate. The swagger was gone. The contempt had evaporated. He looked like what he was, a man facing 3 years in prison for felony forgery and fraud. He didn't come to my study, didn't try to talk or justify or manipulate, just disappeared into the guest room and stayed there. I heard him on the phone later that evening, his voice low and urgent, begging someone for something. The words didn't matter. Desperation has a universal sound. Within days, the collection calls started. Luther's gambling debt had come due May 30th, and the bookmaker had sold the debt to a legitimate collection agency. Technically legal, practically brutal. The calls came hourly, morning, afternoon, evening. Letters arrived daily, each one more threatening than the last. $18,000 with accumulating fees and penalties that grew like compound interest on a nightmare. I heard Luther arguing with the collectors through the thin walls. "I'll pay it back. I just need time. I'm dealing with legal issues. I can't access funds right now." Each excuse weaker than the last, each promise more hollow. Between the bail loan and the gambling debt, they owed $43,000 with no conceivable way to pay it. Mamie's medical office job paid maybe $35,000 annually. Luther had no legitimate income. They were financially drowning, and I was watching from the shore. One evening in early June, Mamie knocked on my study door. The knock was soft, hesitant, so different from the confident way she used to enter without asking. I'd been expecting this conversation since the moment Luther was arrested. She entered when I gestured, closed the door behind her with careful quiet, and sat in the chair across from my desk. The same setup I'd once used in my chambers when hearing cases. Her eyes were red, puffy from crying. Her hands twisted in her lap, wringing an invisible towel. She looked diminished somehow, smaller than I remembered. "Dad," her voice cracked on the single syllable. "I need to tell you everything. The hospital thing. It was fake. All of it. The injury, the surgery, the money. I planned it with Luther and that doctor." "I know." She looked up, shocked. Her mouth opened but no sound came out for several seconds. "You knew? Then why did you—" "I needed you to commit fully to your fraud. Evidence requires completed actions, not just intentions. A judge doesn't convict on thoughts, only deeds." Her face crumpled like paper under flame. "I'm so sorry. I was stupid, greedy. Luther convinced me we needed money, that you had so much, that it wouldn't really hurt you. He said you'd never miss it. Don't blame Luther for your choices." "But you're 38 years old, Mamie. You made every decision yourself. Luther didn't force you to fake an injury. He didn't force you to lie to my face while I held your hand. Those were your choices." She tried different approaches then. Tears, apologies, explanations about financial pressure, and Luther's debts and how scared she'd been. None of it moved me. I'd spent 30 years watching criminals employ every manipulation tactic imaginable. I recognized them all. The tears were real, but the remorse was selective. She regretted getting caught, not the crime itself. "You had countless opportunities to be honest," I said, my tone measured and final. "Every time I gave you money, you could have shown gratitude instead of contempt. Every time you lived in my home, you could have shown respect instead of entitlement. Instead, you chose deception at every turn. I made mistakes. People make mistakes. Families forgive. You can forgive me. Forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. You committed fraud, multiple times, against your own father. You discussed my death like a business opportunity. You tried to steal my property. These aren't mistakes, Mamie. These are crimes. So what? You're just going to abandon me? Your only daughter?" The question hung in the air. I let it sit there, let her hear how hollow it sounded. "You abandoned any claim to my support when you conspired to steal $85,000 from me using a fake medical emergency. You abandoned it further when you forged documents to gain access to my bank accounts. You abandoned it completely when you and Luther discussed putting me in a facility or causing an accident so you could inherit faster." Her face went pale. "You heard that?" "I heard everything." I opened my desk drawer and removed 2 documents. The first I slid across to her, an eviction notice dated June 5th, filed with the county, legally unassailable. My attorney had ensured every word complied with Arizona landlord-tenant law. "You have 30 days to find other accommodation. This notice is filed with the county. It's legally binding." Luther appeared in the doorway, drawn by Mamie's rising voice. His face was haggard, unshaven. "You're evicting us? Your own family?" "You're not my family. You're criminals who happen to share a name and a roof with me temporarily. That roof is being removed in 30 days. Mamie's hands trembled as she read the notice. July 5th. Official stamp. County clerk's signature. Irrevocable. Where are we supposed to go? We have no money. The bail loan, Luther's debts. We're barely surviving. That's a problem you created through your choices. You'll need to solve it through your choices. I pulled out the second document, my revised will, properly notarized and filed. Since you were both so interested in my estate planning, I thought you should see the current will, dated March 15th, 3 weeks before any of this became public. Luther snatched it from the desk, read quickly, his eyes scanning faster as he reached the relevant sections. His face darkened, veins visible at his temples. A charity? You left the house to a charity? The Judicial Veterans Assistance Fund, an organization that helps retired court personnel, people who dedicated their lives to justice instead of undermining it. Mamie found the section detailing her inheritance. Her finger traced the line as if hoping the words would change. 50,000? That's all I get? The house is worth almost 600,000. More than you deserve, frankly. But I made that decision before I knew the full extent of your betrayal. If I could revise it now, you'd get nothing. Luther's control snapped like a brittle wire. You're destroying your own daughter's life out of spite, out of vindictiveness. What kind of father does this? I'm not destroying anything. You both destroyed your own lives through your choices. I'm simply refusing to subsidize the wreckage you created. Mamie's tears turned to anger, her voice rising. You're heartless, cold. You never loved me. This proves it. A real father would help, would forgive, would what? Fund your next scheme? Pay off Luther's gambling debts? Pretend you didn't try to extort nearly $100,000 from me? Ignore that you discussed my death like a business transaction? I looked at her, really looked at her, and felt nothing except clinical detachment. The daughter I'd raised, the child I'd loved, was gone. If she'd ever existed at all. I loved the daughter I thought I had. I loved the person I believed you were. The person standing before me is a stranger who committed fraud, theft, and conspiracy against her own father. That person faces consequences, not love. They left my study, Luther slamming the door hard enough to rattle the frame. I heard them arguing in their room, voices carrying through walls they'd never respected as boundaries. Mamie's crying, Luther's cursing. The sound of something breaking, a lamp maybe, or a phone hurled against the wall. The collection agency called twice more that evening. I heard Luther shouting into his phone, then silence, then the muffled sound of defeat. His car would be repossessed within the week. He'd used it as collateral for something, another scheme that had failed before it began. I sat alone in my study, the eviction notice filed, the will secured in my safe, and returned to reading a legal journal article about evidence preservation in civil fraud cases. Justice isn't emotional, it's procedural. And the procedures were functioning exactly as designed. 30 days until they'd be gone. 30 days until my house was mine again. I marked July 5th on my calendar with a single red line. Freedom had a date now. Late July brought Arizona's brutal heat and Luther's day of reckoning. I sat in the courtroom gallery, 3 rows back from where Luther stood before the bench. The air conditioning hummed steadily, but sweat darkened the collar of his court-appointed suit. Mamie sat in the front row, her posture rigid with tension. She hadn't looked at me when I entered, hadn't acknowledged my presence at all. The judge, a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and no-nonsense demeanor, reviewed the case file one final time before speaking. Her voice carried the weight of authority I recognized from my own years on the bench. Mr. Roberts, you have pleaded guilty to 1 count of forgery and 1 count of attempted fraud, both felonies under Arizona law. The court has reviewed your case thoroughly, including the pre-sentencing report and victim impact statement from Mr. Jesse Perez. Luther stood motionless, his attorney beside him. His hands were clasped behind his back, knuckles white with pressure. The court notes that this fraud was particularly egregious given it targeted a family member, a retired federal judge who dedicated his career to upholding the very laws you violated. You attempted to steal property worth over $500,000 through forged documents. Only the vigilance of a private notary prevented this crime from succeeding. The judge paused, adjusted her glasses, and delivered sentence. 18 months supervised probation, $10,000 in fines payable within 12 months, $5,000 in restitution to Mr. Perez, payable immediately. Community service, 200 hours to be completed within the probation period. Criminal record, permanent felony conviction. Luther's shoulders sagged slightly, but he nodded acceptance. No prison time. The judge had shown mercy given his lack of prior convictions. But his life was effectively over in any meaningful sense. No legitimate employer would hire a convicted felon. His credit was destroyed beyond repair. The felony would follow him everywhere. Job applications, housing applications, loan requests, a scarlet letter in digital ink. Additionally, the judge continued, I'm ordering a 3-year restraining order. You are prohibited from contacting Mr. Perez or approaching within 500 feet of his residence. Violation will result in immediate incarceration. I left the courtroom before Luther was released from the defendant's table. Didn't need to see his face or hear whatever words he might want to say. The sentence was entered into public record, permanent and irrevocable. That was sufficient. The eviction had executed precisely on July 5th, exactly 30 days after I'd served notice. I'd deliberately been at Wallace's office when they moved out. Didn't want to witness the process. Didn't want to give them the satisfaction of seeing me watch their departure. Wallace called mid-afternoon to confirm. Property is clear. They took their belongings, left the keys on the counter. No damage to the premises that I could see. Locks can be changed any time. I'd driven home through Phoenix's shimmering afternoon heat to find the guest room empty. The closet doors stood open, revealing bare hangers and dusty shelves. They'd taken their belongings and left my house keys on the kitchen counter in a small pile. No note, No final words. Just the metallic accusation of abandoned keys. I picked them up and dropped them in the trash. Then I hired a cleaning crew that afternoon. They arrived within 2 hours, a team of 4 who scrubbed every surface Mamie and Luther had touched, shampooed carpets that held their footprints, wiped away fingerprints and presents from door frames, light switches, kitchen counters. The house smelled of industrial cleaner and fresh starts. Painters came the next day. I'd chosen the colors carefully, soft grays and warm whites, nothing like the colors they had lived with. Fresh coats on every wall they had touched, erasing their stains with each roller stroke. The guest room became an office. Their bathroom became a storage space. I was rewriting their existence in my home, one brushstroke at a time. The locks were changed on day 3. A locksmith spent 2 hours installing new deadbolts, changing the security system codes, reprogramming the garage door opener. New keys that had never touched their hands. New codes they'd never known. The house sealed against intrusion, protected against return. Now, in mid-August, I stood on my back patio watching the sun set over Phoenix. The monsoon season had brought dramatic clouds that turned gold and crimson in the dying light. The city sprawled below, indifferent and vast, millions of lives proceeding without knowledge or care about what had transpired in this house. Inside, my home felt different, lighter somehow, as if removing them had restored air pressure to normal levels. The oppressive weight of their presence had lifted, leaving behind only space and silence. My phone rang. Verna Turner's name appeared on the screen. I'd saved her contact information months ago, after her testimony. "Mr. Perez, I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all, Verna. How can I help you?" "I wanted to let you know, the hospital implemented new verification protocols after the investigation. No doctor can authorize expensive procedures without peer review now. Multiple signatures required. Patient verification through independent channels. What you exposed, it changed things here. Changed them for the better." I felt something shift slightly in my chest, warming. "I'm glad to hear it. Other patients won't face what I faced." "Exactly. And Dr. Graham's license was permanently revoked by the state medical board. He'll never practice medicine again anywhere in the country." She paused. "And I wanted to thank you for believing what I told you that morning, for acting on it. Not everyone would have. Most people would have ignored a stranger's warning. You took a significant risk giving that testimony. You stood up when you could have stayed silent. The thanks should go to you." We spoke for a few more minutes. She'd been promoted to nursing supervisor, given formal recognition for her ethical reporting. The hospital had established a whistleblower protection program. Small victories, but meaningful ones that would ripple forward through time. After we said goodbye, I remained on the patio as darkness gathered over the valley. The financial accounting was complete. My money was all recovered. $85,000 from the scam, $15,000 in hospital penalties, $5,000 in court-ordered restitution. My estate was protected through the revised will filed months ago in March. Mamie would receive her $50,000 inheritance someday when I died, nothing more. The house would eventually serve people who dedicated their lives to justice, which felt appropriate and correct. Through my attorney's network, I'd learned that Luther and Mamie were living in a small apartment on the east side, 2 bedrooms, $950 a month. Barely affordable even with Mamie working full-time at a medical office. Their combined income was maybe $66,000 a year. After rent, the bail loan payments, remaining debt obligations, and basic expenses, they had nothing left. No savings, no security, no prospects for improvement. Luther's felony conviction meant he was essentially unemployable in any legitimate field. He'd taken a job at a warehouse, night shift, minimum wage. Mamie's medical office position was entry-level, barely above poverty wages. They were living paycheck to paycheck, drowning in debt that would take years to repay. With no hope of the financial windfall they had murdered their integrity to obtain. The system had functioned correctly, exactly as designed. Evidence was gathered methodically, presented properly, evaluated fairly. Crimes were prosecuted through appropriate channels. Restitution was ordered by the court and paid in full. Civil consequences followed logically from criminal actions. The law had worked because I understood how to make it work. I'd maintained my integrity throughout every stage. Never broke a law, never acted dishonorably, never resorted to violence or threats or anything that would compromise my principles. Just used the knowledge 3 decades on the federal bench had given me: how to document evidence properly, how to build airtight cases, how to let guilty people expose themselves completely before bringing them to justice. Some might say I orchestrated their downfall with calculated precision. I saw it differently. I'd simply refused to prevent the natural consequences of their own choices. They'd built their own trap through greed, deception, and contempt. I'd just made sure they couldn't escape it through manipulation or lies. Standing on my patio as the last light faded and stars began appearing in the darkening sky, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: the pure absence of threat. No one in my house plotting against me while I slept. No one forging documents with my name while pretending concern. No one calculating how soon I'd die so they could inherit what I'd built over a lifetime of work. Just silence, space, a home that was mine again, in every sense that mattered. I'd spent 67 years building a life based on law, order, and integrity. Mamie and Luther had tried to tear it down for quick money and selfish gain. They'd failed because they'd fundamentally underestimated what a judge knows about evidence, consequences, and patience. They'd thought I was weak because I was old. They'd thought I was stupid because I was trusting. They'd thought I was easy prey because I loved my daughter. They'd been wrong about all of it. The revenge they'd face wasn't dramatic or violent or immediate. It was systematic and permanent, legal consequences that would follow them for decades, financial ruin they'd never escape, and the knowledge that they'd destroyed their own futures through greed and stupidity. That was enough, more than enough. I went inside, locked the new door with the new key, and settled into my chair with a book I'd been meaning to read. My house, my peace, my life restored to what it should have been all along. Outside, Phoenix continued its evening routine, indifferent and eternal. Inside, justice had been correctly applied by someone who understood how justice works, and I could finally rest. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.